The first thing visitors noticed about the Bennett penthouse wasn't the priceless art or the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. It was the piano. A magnificent grand piano stood near those windows, its polished surface catching the afternoon light like a black mirror. For 3 years now, it had sat largely untouched except by visitors and hired musicians. Sophia Bennett watched from her wheelchair as the maid dusted the keys. From her usual spot by the bookcase, she could see without being seen, a skill she'd mastered since the accident. At 19, Sophia had the kind of beauty that made people stare, then quickly look away when they noticed her wheelchair. Her long, dark hair fell past her shoulders, framing a face that had grown too serious for someone so young. "Would you like me to open the curtains wider, Miss Sophia?" the maid asked, noticing her in the shadows. "No, thank you, Rita," Sophia replied. "I'm fine here, fine." That word had become her shield. She was fine during physical therapy. Fine when her father's business associates expressed awkward sympathy. Fine when her former friends eventually stopped calling, but she wasn't fine. Not really. 3 years ago, Sophia had been a promising pianist with dreams of Juilliard. 3 years ago, she could run down the stairs of their summer house without thinking twice. 3 years ago, before her horse had been spooked by a snake and thrown her against a rock, breaking her spine. The elevator doors opened, and her father stepped into the penthouse. Richard Bennett was a titan of the tech industry, a self-made billionaire who'd revolutionized cloud storage security. At 52, he still maintained the intense focus that had built his empire, though silver now streaked his temples. "Sophia, I didn't expect you to be up already," he said, his voice softening the way it always did when he spoke to her. He set down his briefcase and crossed the room. "Couldn't sleep," she answered, offering a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Richard knelt beside her wheelchair. "The new specialist from Switzerland is arriving next week. Dr. Holtz has had remarkable success with cases similar to yours." Hope flickered briefly in Sophia's chest, but she quickly extinguished it. She'd learned that hope made disappointment hurt more. "That's good," she said neutrally. Her father sighed, recognizing the wall she'd put up. "I've also been thinking. The Foundation's annual gala is next month. Would you consider attending this year?" The Bennett Foundation for Medical Innovation was her father's pride and joy, second only to his business. Each year he threw an extravagant party, bringing together the wealthy and influential to raise millions for cutting-edge medical research. "I don't think so." "Dad?" Sophia said, turning her wheelchair slightly away. "You know how I feel about being displayed like some kind of inspiration story. That's not what Richard began, then stopped himself. This was an old argument. "Well, think about it. Some fresh air might do you good." He squeezed her shoulder gently before standing. Sophia watched as her father retreated to his home office, his shoulders slightly hunched. She knew he was trying his best. After her mother had died of cancer when Sophia was 12, Richard had thrown himself into medical philanthropy with the same determination he'd applied to building his business. Now he was applying that same bulldozer approach to her recovery, as if enough money and the right connections could fix her broken spine through sheer force of will. The problem was, Sophia wasn't a business challenge to be solved. She was a person drowning in the loss of her former self. Later that evening, after Rita had helped her prepare for bed, Sophia maneuvered her wheelchair to the window. The city stretched below her, millions of lights winking in the darkness. Somewhere out there, people were dancing, running, climbing stairs without a second thought, taking all those ordinary movements for granted. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and closed her eyes, remembering how it felt to have music flow through her fingers onto the piano keys. The doctors had explained that the spinal injury had affected her fine motor control. She could still move her hands, but the precise, quick movements required for playing the piano were beyond her now. "Miss Sophia," Rita's soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You have a physical therapy appointment at 9 tomorrow. Would you like me to set out your blue blouse?" "The green one, please," Sophia replied, turning from the window. "And Rita, could you ask Thomas to bring the car around a bit early? I'd like to stop at the music store on the way back." Rita looked surprised but nodded. "Of course." The physical therapy session the next morning was like all the others. Exhausting, painful, and marked by tiny improvements that felt meaningless in the grand scheme of what she'd lost. Her therapist, Lily, was relentlessly positive, celebrating when Sophia increased her sitting balance time by 8 seconds. You're making real progress, Lily insisted, helping Sophia back into her wheelchair. At this rate, I'll be running marathons by the time I'm 90, Sophia replied dryly. Lily wasn't deterred by the sarcasm. Recovery isn't linear, Sophia, and there's more to healing than physical benchmarks. Tell that to my father and his parade of specialists. After the session, Thomas drove her to the music store as requested. It was a small place she'd visited often before the accident, owned by an older man named Paul who recognized her immediately. Miss Bennett, what a wonderful surprise. His smile was genuine, without the pity she'd come to despise. Hi, Paul. I was hoping to look at some sheet music. He helped her navigate through the narrow aisles, pulling out collections he thought she might like. For a moment it felt like before, just a girl who loved music browsing for her next challenge. Are you still playing the Chopin nocturnes? Paul asked conversationally. The question hit her like a physical blow. No, she said quietly. I can't really play anymore. Understanding dawned on his face. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. It's fine, she said automatically. I just like to read the music sometimes. I can still hear it in my head. On the ride home, Sophia clutched the bag of sheet music to her chest, feeling foolish. What was the point of torturing herself with reminders of what she couldn't do anymore? But later that night, when the penthouse was quiet, she positioned her wheelchair in front of the piano. She placed the new sheet music on the stand, a complex piece by Rachmaninoff she'd always wanted to master. Slowly, she raised her hands over the keys. They trembled slightly, and when she tried to press down, her fingers fumbled, producing a jarring clash of notes. Frustration burned hot behind her eyes. She tried again, focusing all her concentration on making her right hand play a simple C major scale. The notes came out uneven, some too loud, others barely audible. Nothing like the fluid, expressive playing she'd once been capable of. After several painful attempts, she slammed her hands down on the keys in a discordant crash that echoed through the empty penthouse. A tear slid down her cheek, followed by another, and soon she was sobbing, really crying for the first time in months. She didn't hear her father until he was beside her. Sophia, he said softly, his hand hovering uncertainly over her shoulder. She quickly wiped her face. I'm sorry. Did I wake you? Richard shook his head. I was going over some contracts. He paused, looking at the sheet music. Rachmaninoff? A moment of insanity, she muttered, crumpling the paper slightly in her hand. Her father gently took the sheet music, smoothed it out, and placed it back on the stand. Then, to her surprise, he sat beside her on the piano bench. Your mother used to play this, he said, his finger tracing the notes on the page. Not nearly as well as you could, but she loved it. Sophia stared at him. Her father rarely mentioned her mother. I miss hearing you play, he continued, his voice rough with emotion he usually kept hidden. But more than that, I miss seeing you happy, Sophia. I don't know how to be that person anymore, she whispered. Richard didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he awkwardly wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they sat in silence before the piano that had once been the heart of their home. 2 weeks later, the penthouse was transformed for the Foundation Gala. Sophia had surprised everyone by agreeing to attend, though she had made her father promise she wouldn't be singled out or used as a prop for donor sympathy. From her position near the piano, she could observe without being the center of attention. The room buzzed with conversation as New York's elite mingled, champagne flutes in hand, congratulating themselves on their generosity while networking with potential business contacts. Sophia wore a deep blue dress that draped elegantly around her wheelchair. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and she had even applied makeup, small efforts that felt like victories after months of not caring how she looked. As the evening progressed, guests performed the familiar dance of acknowledging her with a smile or nod, before quickly moving on, uncomfortable with the reminder of human fragility her wheelchair represented. Sophia had expected this. What she hadn't expected was the tall man who approached the piano after dinner, someone she didn't recognize from her father's usual circles. He wore a simple dark suit that had seen better days, his tie slightly crooked. He was older, maybe in his late 30s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled at her as he passed. Ladies and gentlemen, her father announced, instead of our usual entertainment, we have a special guest tonight. Mr. Daniel Parker is a music teacher from the Westside Community Center. one of the recipients of our education grants. He's graciously agreed to play for us. Sophia watched as Daniel settled at the piano, his posture relaxed yet focused. When his fingers touched the keys, everything in the room seemed to fade away. He was playing Chopin, her favorite, but not with the technical perfection of the professional musicians her father usually hired. Daniel played with something more valuable, raw emotion that made the notes come alive. His body swayed slightly with the music, his face expressing every crescendo and diminuendo, as if he were having a conversation with the piano. For the first time in 3 years, Sophia felt something stir inside her that wasn't anger or grief. It was recognition, the understanding that music wasn't just about perfect technique. It was about communication, about feeling. When the piece ended, the room erupted in applause. Daniel stood and gave a modest bow, his eyes scanning the crowd until they met Sophia's. He smiled, a genuine smile that acknowledged her not as a tragic figure but as a fellow music lover. And in that moment, though she didn't know it yet, everything was about to change. The guests began to drift away from the piano, returning to their conversations and champagne. But Sophia remained fixed in place, watching as Daniel Parker gathered his sheet music. There was something about him that felt different from the usual people in her father's circle, a genuineness that stood out in a room full of polished facades. When he turned and caught her still watching him, she didn't look away. Instead of the awkward pity she'd grown accustomed to, his expression held simple curiosity. He approached her wheelchair with a direct, unhurried pace. "Did you enjoy the piece?" he asked, his voice warm and unassuming. "Very much," Sophia replied, surprised by her own willingness to engage. "Your interpretation of Chopin was different." Daniel smiled. "Different good or different bad?" "Different real," she said. "Most people play the notes. You played the feeling behind them." Something flashed in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "You're a musician," he stated, not a question. "I was," Sophia said, the familiar heaviness settling back into her chest. She gestured vaguely at her wheelchair. "Before." Daniel tilted, his head slightly, studying her with interest rather than sympathy. Before what? The question caught her off guard. Everyone in her life tiptoed around the accident, treating it as an unspeakable tragedy. "Before I was paralyzed," she said bluntly. "I used to play piano." "Used to?" He glanced at her hands, which rested in her lap. "Your fingers look fine to me." Sophia felt a flicker of irritation. "My fine motor control was affected. I can't coordinate my fingers the way I need to for playing properly." "Ah," Daniel nodded, but didn't offer platitudes. Instead, he asked, "Would you like to try?" She stared at him, wondering if he was mocking her. "I just told you I can't." "You said you can't play properly," he countered, his tone matter-of-fact. "There's a world of difference between can't play properly and can't play at all." Before she could respond, her father appeared at her side, hand extended toward Daniel. "Mr. Parker, thank you for the wonderful performance," Richard said, smoothly inserting himself into the conversation. "Your talent is remarkable." "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Bennett," Daniel replied, shaking his hand. "Your foundation's supportive community music programs is making a real difference for kids who otherwise wouldn't have access to instruments or lessons." Richard nodded, clearly pleased. "That's precisely our goal. I believe that exposure to the arts is essential for a well-rounded education." He glanced down at Sophia. "My daughter was quite an accomplished pianist herself." "So she mentioned," Daniel said, his eyes still on Sophia. "I was just suggesting she might like to play something tonight." The look of alarm on her father's face would have been comical in any other context. "Oh, I don't think—" "It's fine, Dad," Sophia interrupted, a sudden boldness taking hold of her. "Mr. Parker doesn't understand the extent of my limitations." Daniel didn't flinch at her sharp tone. "Maybe not," he agreed easily. "But I do understand that music finds a way, if you let it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, offering it to her. "If you ever want to explore what's possible instead of focusing on what isn't, Give me a call. Her father took the card before Sophia could, glancing at it briefly. That's very kind, but Sophia works with specialized medical professionals for her rehabilitation. Of course, Daniel said, stepping back. It was just a thought. He looked once more at Sophia. It was a pleasure meeting you. Your insights on Chopin tell me you have a deep understanding of music. That kind of understanding never goes away, wheelchair or not. After he moved away, pulled into conversation with the Foundation's educational director, Sophia turned to her father. Can I have his card, please? Richard hesitated, then handed it over with obvious reluctance. Sophia, I know you miss playing, but getting your hopes up with amateur teaching methods isn't helpful. We have the best specialists working on your case. It's just a card, Dad, she said, slipping it into her dress pocket. Besides, didn't you just praise his talent? For playing, yes, but rehabilitation is a complex medical issue. Sophia smiled thinly. Maybe that's the problem. Everyone keeps treating me like a medical issue. The rest of the evening dragged on endlessly. Sophia found herself watching Daniel as he navigated the room, noticing how he gave each person he spoke with his full attention. Unlike most of the guests, he seemed more interested in listening than in being heard. By the time the last guest departed, Sophia was exhausted. Rita helped her prepare for bed, chatting about the evening's highlights as she did so. That pianist was something special, Rita remarked, hanging up Sophia's dress. Not like those stiff performers Mr. Bennett usually hires. He teaches at a community center, Sophia said, remembering the card in her pocket. Daniel Parker. Teaching's a noble profession, Rita commented. My sister's boy learned violin through a community program like that. Changed his whole life. After Rita left, Sophia pulled out the business card and studied it by the soft light of her bedside lamp. It was simple white cardstock with black text. Daniel Parker, music instructor, followed by a phone number and email address. She traced the letters with her fingertip, considering what he'd said about possibilities. 3 days later, she found herself directing Thomas to drive her to the address on the card, a modest community center in a neighborhood far removed from her father's world of penthouses and charity galas. Richard was away on business in Tokyo, which made her impromptu decision easier to act on. The building was worn but well-maintained, with children's artwork displayed proudly in the windows. As Thomas helped her navigate her wheelchair up the ramp, Sophia felt a flutter of nervousness. She hadn't ventured into an unfamiliar place without her father or a caretaker in 3 years. Should I accompany you inside, Miss Sophia? Thomas asked, concern evident in his voice. No, thank you, she said with more confidence than she felt. I'll text you when I'm ready to leave. Inside, the center buzzed with activity. A group of older adults gathered in what appeared to be an art class. Teenagers clustered around computers in another room, and the distant sound of children's laughter from somewhere down the hall. At the reception desk, a friendly woman in her 60s looked up. Can I help you, dear? I'm looking for Daniel Parker, Sophia said. The music teacher. He's finishing up a lesson now. Down that hallway, 3rd door on the right. You're welcome to wait outside the room. Sophia thanked her and wheeled herself in the direction indicated, acutely aware of how out of place she looked in her expensive clothes and custom wheelchair. She could hear piano music as she approached. A simple tune played by young hands, followed by Daniel's encouraging voice. The door was partially open and Sophia paused outside, suddenly unsure of her impulsive decision to come here. Through the gap, she could see Daniel sitting beside a young boy at an upright piano that had seen better days. The boy couldn't have been more than 10, and his face was scrunched in concentration as he worked through a simple melody. That's it, Andy. Nice and steady, Daniel was saying. Remember, music isn't a race. It's about the journey. The boy hit a wrong note and stopped, frustrated. I keep messing up. Mistakes are how we learn, Daniel replied calmly. Every great pianist makes mistakes. The difference is they don't let those mistakes stop them from continuing. Something about those words resonated deeply with Sophia. She'd been letting her mistakes, or rather, her inability to avoid them, stop her from even trying. The lesson concluded a few minutes later and the boy bounded out, nearly colliding with Sophia's wheelchair. "Whoa, sorry," he exclaimed, dodging around her. Daniel appeared in the doorway, surprise registering on his face when he saw her. "Sophia Bennett," he said. "This is unexpected." "I should have called first," she said, suddenly feeling foolish. "No, it's fine," he assured her, stepping back to make room for her wheelchair. "Come in. I have about 20 minutes before my next student." The music room was nothing like the elegant space she was used to. It was small and cluttered, with mismatched chairs, shelves overflowing with sheet music, and various instruments in different states of repair. The piano was an old upright model with chipped keys and visible wear, but it had been well maintained where it counted. "It's not exactly Carnegie Hall," Daniel said, noticing her taking in the surroundings. "It's nice," Sophia replied, and was surprised to find she meant it. The room had a lived-in quality that felt welcoming. "You said something at the gala about exploring what's possible. I've been thinking about that." Daniel pulled up a chair to sit at her eye level, giving her his full attention. "Tell me about your playing." "Before the accident." For the next 15 minutes, Sophia found herself opening up more than she had in years. She told him about starting piano lessons at age 5, about the competitions she'd won, about her dreams of Juilliard and becoming a concert pianist. She explained how the accident had damaged her spinal cord, affecting the neural pathways that controlled precise finger movements. "The doctors say I might regain more function over time," she concluded, "but it will never be enough for the level of playing I used to do." Daniel listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he said, "May I see your hands?" Hesitantly, she extended them toward him. His own hands were strong and calloused. Working hands, unlike the manicured softness of her father's. "Can you wiggle your fingers?" he asked. She demonstrated, the movements clumsy and uncoordinated. "Can you make a fist? Open it. Touch your thumb to each fingertip." She performed each task, some more successfully than others. "You have more capability than you realize," he said finally. "Different, yes. Limited compared to before, but still significant." "Not enough to play properly," she insisted. "There's that word again. Properly." Daniel stood and moved to the piano. "Music isn't about perfection, Sophia. It's about expression, connection." He played a simple sequence of chords. Some of the most moving pieces I've ever heard were played by students with far less technical ability than you still have. He moved aside and gestured to the piano. "Try something simple, just for yourself. Not for an audience, not for comparison to who you were before, just to feel the keys under your fingers again." Sophia hesitated, fear of failure warring with desperate longing. "I don't know if I can." "That's the point," Daniel said gently. "Neither do I, neither do you. The only way to find out is to try." Slowly, she wheeled herself forward. The height of the bench was wrong for her wheelchair. The angle awkward, but Daniel quickly improvised, adjusting her position and the chair until she could reach the keys comfortably. "Middle C," he prompted. "Just find it for me." With trembling fingers, she pressed the key. The note rang out clear and true. Something inside her chest loosened at the sound. Now a C major scale, as slow as you need to. One note at a time, with long pauses between each, Sophia played the scale. The movements were jerky, the timing uneven. Nothing like the fluid runs she used to execute without thought. But the notes were right. The sound was right. When she finished, she realized tears were streaming down her face. "That," Daniel said quietly, "was music." Sophia's weekly visits to the community center quickly became the highlight of her days. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Thomas would drive her across the city to her lessons with Daniel, waiting patiently outside while she discovered a new way of connecting with music. Daniel's approach was unlike anything she'd experienced. With her previous teachers or the parade of specialists her father hired, he focused on what she could do rather than what she couldn't, adapting techniques to work with her limitations instead of trying to overcome them. "Music is like water," he explained during their third session. "It finds its own path. Our job is just to open the channels and let it flow." On this particular Thursday, Sophia arrived to find Daniel setting up what looked like a miniature keyboard connected to a laptop. "What's that?" she asked, wheeling closer to examine the strange setup. "This," Daniel said with a grin, "is our new experiment. It's a MIDI controller with adaptive software that lets you program it to respond differently to your touch." He gestured for her to come closer. The keys require less pressure than a traditional piano, and we can adjust the sensitivity to match your current abilities. Sophia felt a familiar mix of hope and skepticism. Where did you get this? The foundation that supports our center had it in storage. It was part of a program for students with physical challenges that lost funding last year. He connected a final cable. I had to hunt down the software and update some drivers, but it should work now. She positioned her wheelchair in front of the device. How does it work? Try playing something simple, he suggested. Just a few notes. Sophia placed her fingers on the keys, which felt lighter and more responsive than a regular piano. When she pressed down, the sound that emerged from the connected speakers was that of a grand piano, rich and full. Now watch this, Daniel said, adjusting some settings on the laptop. Try again. This time, when she played the same notes with the same pressure, the sound was stronger, more defined. The software was amplifying her touch, making up for what her fingers couldn't do on their own. That's amazing, she whispered. It gets better, Daniel promised. The software learns your playing patterns over time and adapts to them. It can even help smooth out timing issues between notes. He pulled up a chair beside her. It's not a replacement for a real piano, but it's a tool that can help bridge the gap between what you want to express and what your fingers can physically do right now. For the next hour, Sophia experimented with the device, discovering how it could compensate for her physical limitations. By the end of the session, she had played through a simple Bach piece that would have been impossible for her on a traditional piano. I want you to borrow this, Daniel said, as their time came to an end. Practice with it at home, are you sure? Isn't it center property? Technically, yes, but it's not doing anyone any good sitting in storage. He helped her pack up the equipment. Besides, I've cleared it with the director. Educational outreach is part of our mission. Thomas helped load the equipment into the car, his normally stoic expression softening when Sophia explained what it was for. Your father will be pleased to see you taking an interest in music again, Miss Sophia. But when she arrived home, her father's reaction wasn't what she expected. What exactly is this? Richard asked, eyeing the equipment Thomas was carrying into the penthouse. It's an adaptive MIDI controller, Sophia explained, her excitement dimming at his frown. It helps people with physical limitations play music. And where did you get it? Daniel loaned it to me. From the community center. Richard's frown deepened. You've been going to his lessons for almost a month now. Don't you think it's time to return to Dr. Matsura's therapy program? She's specifically trained in rehabilitative medicine for spinal injuries. This is different, Dad, Sophia insisted. Daniel isn't trying to fix me. He's showing me how to work with what I have now. Accepting limitations isn't the Bennett way, Richard said, his voice taking on the firm tone he typically reserved for business negotiations. We push boundaries. We overcome obstacles. Maybe that works for building tech empires, Sophia shot back. But my spine isn't a business problem you can solve by throwing money at it. Her father looked as if she'd slapped him. In the uncomfortable silence that followed, Rita appeared from the kitchen, sensing the tension. Mr. Bennett, dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, she announced, providing a welcome interruption. Richard nodded stiffly. Thank you, Rita. To Sophia, he added, We'll discuss this later, before retreating to his office. Rita helped Sophia set up the equipment in the music room, near the grand piano that had sat largely untouched for 3 years. He means well, Rita said quietly, referring to Richard. He just doesn't know how to help you, so he does what he knows, tries to solve problems with resources and experts. I know, Sophia sighed, but sometimes I don't need him to solve anything. I just need him to listen. Later that evening, after her father had gone to sleep, Sophia returned to the music room. She connected the headphones to the MIDI controller to avoid waking anyone and began to play. The technology wasn't perfect. There was a slight delay, and it couldn't fully capture the nuances she wanted to express. But it allowed her to create music again. She lost track of time, experimenting with different settings and playing pieces she had memorized years ago. Around midnight, she heard a sound and looked up to find her father standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. I'm sorry if I disturbed you, she said, removing the headphones. You didn't, he replied, moving into the room. He gestured to the equipment. Show me how it works. Surprised, Sophia demonstrated the basics of the adaptive controller. explaining how it compensated for her inconsistent finger pressure and timing. "It's quite ingenious," Richard admitted when she finished. "Who developed this technology?" "Several companies make versions of it. This particular one was designed for music therapy programs." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "And this Daniel? He seems knowledgeable about adaptive technologies." "He knows a lot about making music accessible," Sophia said carefully, sensing her father was evaluating Daniel as he would a potential business associate. "He works with all kinds of students at the center, kids with various challenges, older people with arthritis, veterans with injuries." Richard was silent for a moment, then asked, "Would you play something for me?" "Without the headphones." Sophia hesitated, suddenly nervous. She hadn't played for an audience, even an audience of one, since before her accident. "I'm not very good anymore," she warned. "I'd still like to hear it," her father said, sitting in a nearby chair. She chose a simple Chopin prelude, one that had once been effortless for her. Now, even with the adaptive technology, her performance was halting and imperfect. Notes that should have flowed together came in uneven bursts. The expression was there in her mind, but her fingers couldn't fully translate it. When she finished, she kept her eyes on the keys, afraid to see disappointment on her father's face. "You're playing again," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. She looked up to find him blinking rapidly. "It's not the same," she said. "No, it's not," he agreed, "but it's still music. It's still you." He cleared his throat. "I've been so focused on getting back what was lost that I haven't paid enough attention to what might be found instead." The next morning, Richard called Daniel directly, catching Sophia by surprise when she wheeled into the kitchen for breakfast to find them already in conversation. "Yes, I understand the limitations," her father was saying into his phone, "but if there are more advanced technologies available, cost isn't an issue." He paused, listening. "I see. Well, that's a perspective I hadn't considered." When he hung up, he turned to find Sophia watching him warily. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Exploring options," Richard replied. "Daniel has agreed to come here tomorrow to assess our piano and see what modifications might be possible. He also mentioned some interesting research being done in Europe on adaptive music technology." "Dad, please don't take over this too," Sophia said, her stomach sinking. "This is important to me." Richard's expression softened. "I know. That's why I asked for his guidance rather than steamrolling ahead with my own solutions." He reached out awkwardly to pat her hand. "I'm trying to listen more and fix less. It doesn't come naturally to me." The next afternoon, Daniel arrived at the penthouse looking slightly out of place in the opulent surroundings. He carried a worn leather bag filled with tools and equipment. "Mr. Bennett," he greeted Richard with a firm handshake. "Thank you for reaching out." "Please call me Richard," her father replied, his usual formality softened somewhat. "And thank you for coming." Sophia watched with interest as the two men, so different in background, lifestyle, and worldview, found common ground in their desire to help her reconnect with music. Daniel examined the grand piano, explaining various modifications that could make it more accessible without compromising its integrity. "The pedals are the biggest challenge," Daniel explained, showing how Sophia's wheelchair prevented her from reaching them properly. "But there are solutions, pedal extenders or even electronic pedals that can be positioned within reach." "Whatever is needed," Richard said. "It's not just about equipment," Daniel cautioned. "It's about approach. Sophia won't play the same way she did before, but that doesn't mean she can't play beautifully, just differently." As they talked, Sophia realized something important was happening. A bridge was being built between her past and her possible future, between the world of privilege she'd been born into and the more practical, adaptable world Daniel represented. When Daniel demonstrated some simple modifications using items he'd brought in his bag, she found herself able to play a short piece on her beloved grand piano for the first time in 3 years. The sound was richer, more resonant than the digital output of the MIDI controller, and tears sprang to her eyes at the familiar vibrations she could feel through her fingers. "This is just the beginning," Daniel said, noting her emotional response. "There's so much more that's possible." For the first time since her accident, Sophia truly believed him. Over the next 2 months, the Bennett penthouse underwent a subtle transformation. The music room, once a shrine to what Sophia had lost, became a laboratory of possibility. Daniel visited twice a week, bringing new adaptive tools and techniques each time. Richard, to Sophia's ongoing surprise, made a point of being present for many of these sessions, asking questions and taking notes with the same intensity he brought to business meetings. But progress wasn't linear. Some days Sophia felt like she was finally reconnecting with her musical identity. Other days the gulf between what she could do now and what she had once been capable of felt insurmountable. "I hate this," she muttered one particularly frustrating afternoon, after repeatedly failing to master a passage that once would have been simple for her. She slammed her hands down on the keyboard, producing a jarring clash of notes. Daniel, sitting beside her, didn't flinch at the outburst. "What specifically are you hating right now?" he asked calmly. "All of it. The clumsy fingers, the awkward adaptations, having to relearn everything I used to know instinctively." She gestured at the modified piano pedals Daniel had installed. "It's like trying to paint a masterpiece while wearing boxing gloves." "That's a pretty accurate description, actually," Daniel acknowledged. "But here's the thing about constraints. They force you to find creative solutions you'd never discover otherwise." Sophia rolled her eyes. "Please don't turn this into an inspirational speech about overcoming adversity." Daniel laughed, a genuine sound that cut through her dark mood. "I wouldn't dare. I just meant that some of the most innovative music in history came from people working around limitations, technical, physical, or otherwise." He shifted on the bench to face her more directly. "Look, it's okay to hate this process sometimes. It's frustrating and unfair. You're allowed to acknowledge that." His honesty was refreshing after years of people tiptoeing around her feelings. "My father thinks I'm making miraculous progress," she said with a sigh. "He's so excited about every tiny improvement that he doesn't see how far I still am from where I used to be." "Maybe he's looking at a different measuring stick," Daniel suggested. "From what I can tell, he's just happy to see you engaged with music again, regardless of the technical level." Sophia considered this. Her father had indeed been unusually supportive lately, even installing a specialized elevator to make it easier for her to attend a concert the previous week, their first outing to a musical event since her accident. Their conversation was interrupted by Rita, who appeared at the door with a tray of tea. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but Mr. Bennett asked me to remind you about the Foundation dinner tonight, Miss Sophia. He hopes you'll still attend." The Bennett Foundation's quarterly dinner was smaller than their annual gala, but still an important event on their social calendar. Sophia had been avoiding these gatherings since her accident, but had tentatively agreed to join this one. "I haven't decided yet," she said, taking the cup Rita offered. After Rita left, Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Not a fan of foundation dinners?" "Not a fan of being the object of pitying glances and awkward conversations," Sophia replied. "People either avoid looking at my wheelchair entirely or they stare like I'm an exhibit at the zoo." "That sounds uncomfortable," Daniel agreed. "Though I've noticed your father seems to genuinely value your input on foundation matters. He mentioned you had some insights about their music education grants." Sophia looked surprised. "He talked to you about that?" "He did. He was quite impressed with your suggestion to focus on adaptive instruments for their next funding cycle." This was news to Sophia. She'd mentioned the idea to her father in passing, not expecting him to take it seriously. "Would it help to have a friendly face there?" Daniel asked after a moment. "The director invited me to attend as a representative of the community center." "You're going?" Sophia hadn't considered the possibility. "I was planning to. These events are important networking opportunities for small programs like ours." He hesitated, then added, "But I'd be happy to sit at your table if that would make things easier. I've gotten pretty good at deflecting awkward questions over the years." The idea of having Daniel there as a buffer between her and the well-meaning but often uncomfortable interactions with her father's associates was appealing. That would actually help a lot, she admitted. That evening, Sophia found herself more engaged in the foundation dinner than she had expected to be. Daniel sat beside her, skillfully steering conversations toward topics she was comfortable with and away from the medical details of her condition that people seemed morbidly curious about. "Mr. Parker was just telling us about the remarkable progress his students are making with the foundation's support," one board member commented during dessert. "Have you had a chance to visit the center, Sophia?" "Actually, I go twice a week," she replied, feeling a small surge of pride at the surprised looks around the table. The work they're doing with adaptive music education is incredible. Sophia has been providing valuable insights for our program, Daniel added smoothly. Her perspective as both a classically trained pianist and someone navigating adaptive techniques gives her a unique viewpoint. Richard, seated across the table, was watching this exchange with an unreadable expression. Later, as the event was winding down, he approached where Sophia and Daniel were chatting with the Foundation's educational director. "I hope you don't mind if I borrow my daughter for a moment," Richard said to Daniel. To Sophia, he added, "There's someone I'd like you to meet." Curious, Sophia followed as her father guided her wheelchair toward a distinguished-looking older woman in a simple but elegant black dress. "Sophia, this is Dr. Lydia Chen," Richard introduced. "She's the director of the Adaptive Arts Institute in Boston. Dr. Chen, my daughter Sophia." The woman smiled warmly and shook Sophia's hand. "Your father has told me about your journey back to music. It sounds like you're doing remarkable work. I'm just finding my way," Sophia said, slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "That's exactly why I wanted to connect you two," Richard explained. "Dr. Chen's institute is developing a program specifically focused on helping classically trained musicians adapt after injuries or medical conditions, affect their playing abilities. We're bringing together medical specialists, music educators, and technology designers," Dr. Chen elaborated. "The goal is to create personalized approaches rather than one-size-fits-all solutions." Sophia glanced at her father, surprised. This was exactly the kind of program she would have been interested in, but it wasn't the type of highly medical, recovery-focused approach he usually favored. "It sounds fascinating," she said sincerely to Dr. Chen. "We're hosting a weekend workshop next month," Dr. Chen continued. "A small group of musicians sharing their experiences and testing new adaptive technologies. We'd love to have you join us if you're interested." "I am," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Definitely interested." As Dr. Chen excused herself to speak with another guest, Sophia turned to her father. "Thank you for that introduction. It sounds like exactly what I've been looking for." Richard nodded, looking slightly awkward as he often did when emotions entered the conversation. "I've been doing some research. After seeing your work with Daniel, I realized there might be better approaches than the purely medical route we've been pursuing." The fact that her father had taken the initiative to find resources aligned with what she actually wanted, rather than what he thought she needed, meant more to Sophia than he probably realized. "Would you like me to accompany you to Boston?" he asked. "Or would you prefer to go alone?" The question itself was a small revolution. For 3 years, her father had insisted on orchestrating every aspect of her medical care and rehabilitation. The simple act of asking her preference rather than making the decision for her felt like a significant shift in their relationship. "I think I'd like to try going on my own," she said carefully, watching for his reaction. Though a flicker of concern crossed his face, Richard nodded. "Of course. Thomas can fly you up in the company jet, and we'll make sure accommodations are properly accessible." From across the room, Sophia caught Daniel watching their exchange with interest. When their eyes met, he gave her an encouraging smile before returning to his conversation with the Foundation director. Later, as guests were departing, Daniel approached her. "Everything okay? You and your father seem to be having an intense discussion." "Everything's good, actually," Sophia replied, still processing the evening's developments. "He introduced me to someone running an adaptive music program in Boston. I'm going to attend a workshop there next month." "Dr. Chen's program?" Daniel asked, looking impressed. "I've heard amazing things about their work." "That's a fantastic opportunity. You know about it?" "I tried to get a scholarship to attend one of their teacher training sessions last year," he explained. "It's cutting-edge stuff." An idea began to form in Sophia's mind. "Would you still be interested in going?" Daniel laughed. "Of course, but it's well outside my budget. Even with travel scholarships, the program itself has a substantial fee." "What if that wasn't an issue?" Sophia asked. "What if the Bennett Foundation sponsored your participation as part of their commitment to music education?" "That would be incredible," Daniel admitted. "But I wouldn't want to impose or create any awkwardness with your father." "Actually," Sophia said with growing confidence, "I think it's exactly the kind of initiative he'd support, especially if it meant I'd have a familiar face there to help navigate the experience." As she spoke the words, Sophia realized how much her perspective had changed in the months since she'd first met Daniel. She had gone from hiding in her penthouse to actively planning her participation in a professional workshop, from avoiding music to embracing new ways of creating it, from seeing her wheelchair as the end of her musical identity to recognizing it as simply part of her current reality. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in 3 years, she was moving forward rather than looking back. The Boston workshop exceeded all of Sophia's expectations. For 3 days, she was immersed in a community of musicians who understood precisely what she was experiencing. Some were professional performers adapting to injuries or conditions that affected their playing. Others were teachers and therapists developing new approaches to music education. What united them all was a refusal to accept traditional limitations. "I've never seen anything like this," Daniel remarked as they explored the exhibition hall on the second day. Thanks to Sophia's suggestion, the Bennett Foundation had indeed sponsored his participation as an educational outreach initiative. The hall was filled with innovative technologies, pianos with re-engineered key actions, wind instruments that could be played with minimal breath control, string instruments modified for players with limited mobility. Each station featured demonstrations by musicians who had adapted their techniques to work with the devices. "Look at this," Sophia said, stopping her wheelchair, in front of a display where a violinist with a prosthetic arm was performing a complex piece by Bach. The specialized prosthesis allowed for remarkably nuanced bow control through a combination of body movements and subtle muscle contractions. "Beautiful phrasing," Daniel observed, listening intently to the music. "You can hear how she's adapted the interpretation to work with her unique technique." Sophia nodded, struck by how the woman's playing wasn't merely a technical achievement, but a genuine artistic expression. "That's what I've been missing," she said quietly. "I've been so focused on what I can't do that I haven't fully explored what I can do differently." "That's exactly the shift in thinking we try to encourage," said a voice behind them. They turned to find Dr. Chen approaching with a warm smile. "It's not about replicating what was lost, but about discovering new pathways to expression." Dr. Chen had taken a personal interest in Sophia's situation, meeting with her several times during the workshop to discuss specialized approaches. "How are you finding the sessions so far?" she asked. "Transformative," Sophia replied honestly. "I've spent 3 years thinking about my playing in terms of deficits, all the techniques I've lost. This is the first time I've been encouraged to think in terms of possibilities instead." "That's what we're all about," Dr. Chen said. "Actually, I was hoping to catch you before the afternoon sessions. There's someone I'd like you to meet. Are you free around 4 o'clock? Sophia checked her schedule. "I have the adaptive technology roundtable, but I could skip it." "Perfect. Meet me in Studio C after the panel discussions." With a quick smile, Dr. Chen continued on her rounds of the exhibition. "Any idea what that's about?" Daniel asked. "None," Sophia admitted, "but everything she's suggested so far has been incredibly helpful." The afternoon sessions flew by, with Daniel attending a teacher training workshop, while Sophia participated in a panel discussion about the psychological aspects of adapting to new playing techniques. By 4 o'clock, she found herself wheeling toward Studio C with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. When she entered the room, she found Dr. Chen chatting with a young man seated at a grand piano. He appeared to be in his mid-20s with an athletic build and an easy smile. What caught Sophia's attention, however, was his right hand, or rather the absence of it. In its place was a specialized prosthetic device fitted over the wrist. "Ah, Sophia, right on time," Dr. Chen said, gesturing her forward. "I'd like you to meet Alex Turner." "Alex, this is Sophia Bennett, the pianist I mentioned." "Nice to meet you," Alex said, standing to shake her hand with his left. "Alex is one of our success stories," Dr. Chen explained. "He lost his right hand in a car accident 6 years ago, when he was in his final year at Juilliard." Sophia's eyes widened. "You were at Juilliard?" "Piano performance major," he confirmed. "I thought my musical career was over after the accident. Then I met Dr. Chen at a rehabilitation center where she was giving a presentation. Alex has been working with us to develop and refine prosthetic options for pianists," Dr. Chen continued. "He's now a concert pianist again, though his repertoire and technique have evolved significantly." "Would you mind playing something?" Sophia asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Alex smiled and returned to the piano. I've adapted most of my repertoire to highlight what this hand can do, he explained, indicating the prosthetic. It's not the same as having 5 independent fingers, but it has its own capabilities. He began to play, and Sophia watched in amazement. The prosthetic device allowed him to create chords and supporting patterns with his right arm, while his left hand handled the more intricate melodic lines. The piece wasn't simplified, rather it was reimagined to work with his unique abilities. The music flowed with emotional depth and artistic intention, not as a technical exercise but as a genuine performance. When he finished, Sophia found herself blinking back tears. "That was beautiful," she said simply. "It took years to get here," Alex admitted, "and countless hours of frustration. But finding my way back to music was worth every minute of it." He gestured to her wheelchair. "Dr. Chen mentioned you're dealing with fine motor control issues?" "Yes, from a spinal injury." Sophia explained her situation briefly. "That's actually why I wanted to introduce you to," Dr. Chen interjected. "Alex has been helping us develop a teaching methodology specifically for pianists with neural pathway disruptions like yours. Sophia, I'd be happy to show you some of the techniques we've been working on," Alex offered. "They're not quite ready for publication yet, but you'd be an ideal test case." For the next hour, Alex guided Sophia through exercises and approaches that were unlike anything she'd tried before. Rather than attempting to recover her previous technique, these methods embraced the new reality of her hands and built from there. Some involved technology, others were purely about reimagining her relationship with the keyboard. By the time Daniel found them, Sophia was playing a simplified but emotionally resonant version of a Chopin nocturne, using a combination of techniques Alex had demonstrated. "That sounds incredible," Daniel said from the doorway, his face lighting up at the sight of Sophia so engaged. As they returned to their hotel that evening, Sophia was quiet, processing everything she'd learned. Daniel seemed to understand her need for silence, offering his thoughts only when they reached the lobby. "Life-changing day?" he asked simply. "You could say that," she replied. Meeting Alex, it put everything in perspective. He lost his hand completely and found his way back to being a concert pianist. "If he can do that, then I have no excuses." "It's not about excuses," Daniel reminded her gently. "It's about choices." "I know," Sophia said. "And I'm making one now. When we get back to New York, I want to start performing again. Nothing major. Maybe just at your community center to start, but I need to play for others, not just for myself." Daniel's expression was one of quiet pride. "The kids would love it, and I think you might be surprised by how ready you are." 2 weeks later, Sophia wheeled herself into the community center's modest performance space. It was a far cry from the concert halls she'd once dreamed of playing in. Just a small room with folding chairs arranged in rows and a well-worn upright piano at the front. But as the space filled with children from Daniel's classes, their parents and staff from the center, she felt a nervous excitement that had been absent from her life for too long. Daniel had helped her prepare a short program of pieces adapted to her current abilities. Some used the MIDI technology they'd been experimenting with. Others were traditional piano works that she'd reimagined with Alex's techniques. Each represented not what she had lost, but what she had discovered. Her father sat in the front row, looking both proud and slightly out of place in his expensive suit among the center's diverse community. Next to him was Rita, who had insisted on coming to support her, even though I don't know much about fancy music. At the scheduled time, Daniel stepped forward to introduce her. His words were simple but heartfelt, as he explained to the audience about adaptive music and the journey Sophia had undertaken. Then it was her turn. As she positioned her wheelchair at the piano, adjusted to the height Daniel had carefully preset, and placed her fingers on the keys, Sophia felt a moment of panic. What if she failed? What if her playing wasn't good enough? What if people only applauded out of pity? But when she began to play, those fears melted away. Yes, her technique was different now. Yes, there were passages she had to simplify or approach in new ways. But the music was still there, the emotion, the connection, the expression that had drawn her to the piano in the first place. She played for nearly 30 minutes, lost in the experience of sharing music again. When she finished her final piece, a simple but moving arrangement of a Bach prelude, the room erupted in genuine applause. Not the polite, uncomfortable clapping she had feared, but enthusiastic appreciation. As Daniel had predicted, the children were particularly receptive, crowding around afterward to ask questions about how she played certain parts or what the music meant to her. One young boy with leg braces told her shyly that he wanted to learn piano too, but thought he couldn't because of his difficulty using the pedals. "There's always a way," Sophia told him with newfound conviction. "The music finds a path." Later, as the crowd dispersed and Daniel's students helped clean up the space, her father approached, his expression thoughtful. "That wasn't at all what I expected," he admitted. "In a good way or a bad way?" Sophia asked, suddenly concerned. "Good. Definitely good." Richard seemed to be struggling to find the right words. "For 3 years I've been trying to get back the daughter I lost in that accident. But watching you tonight I realized something important." "What's that?" "You're not that person anymore. And that's not a tragedy, it's just a fact. You've become someone new, someone who found a different kind of strength." He reached out awkwardly and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of who you are now, not who you were then." Coming from her father, those words meant everything. Sophia felt something shift inside her, a weight lifting that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. The need to measure herself against her past self, the pressure to recover what was lost rather than discover what was possible. As she looked around the community center, at Daniel chatting with his students, at the modest piano that had become her pathway back to music, at the diverse group of people who had come to hear her play without preconceptions or pity, Sophia recognized that her life had taken a turn she never could have anticipated. Her journey wasn't about returning to who she had been before the accident. It was about becoming someone new, someone who understood that limitations weren't endpoints but doorways to unexpected possibilities. Someone who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unlikely circumstances, and that was a song worth playing.